Hello, my name is Paxton Johnson. I'm 34 years old, and if you ask me what has shaped who I am today, I'd say it's the golden sun-drenched days in Charleston, South Carolina, mingled with the scent of sea salt and the way my family, though full of love, left cracks that could never be mended. Charleston isn't just the place where I was born. It's where I learned to stand back up no matter how many times life knocked me down. I grew up in a large classic Southern house with a pristine white porch and azalea bushes blooming year-round. My grandparents, seasoned entrepreneurs, once owned a small empire of retail stores and real estate across the state. They passed away when I was only 5, but their legacy lingered, not just in wealth but in the Johnson name, a name that carried both expectations and burdens. My parents, the inheritors of that legacy, continued to expand the family business. They were busy people, always buried in contracts, business trips, and lavish parties with partners. I don't entirely blame them, but I grew up with a sense of lack, not of money, but of hugs, of conversations over dinner, or even a simple question like, "How was your day?" I have a younger brother, Logan, 8 years my junior. He was the light in our parents' eyes, the spoiled child with almost no limits. Logan grew up surrounded by expensive gifts, brand new cars the moment he was old enough to drive, and our parents' constant excuses for his every mistake. I remember one time when Logan, at 6 years old, broke one of our grandmother's antique vases, a piece worth a small fortune. I braced myself for a scolding, but my dad just laughed, ruffled Logan's hair, and said, "Son, it's just a vase, we'll buy another one." I stood there, 14 years old, watching the scene and wondering if I had ever been loved like that. But don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to sit around whining about my childhood. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to earn it myself. At 15, I started working at a local diner, washing dishes and waiting tables on weekends. The smell of grease, the clatter of pots and pans, the feeling of sweat rolling down my forehead after a long shift. All of it made me feel alive. I loved that job not just for the money, but because it taught me that hard work was the only way to prove my worth. While Logan was whisked off to Europe by our parents, I spent my summers in that sweltering kitchen, but I wasn't jealous. I knew I was building something, not just savings, but myself. My family wasn't always distant. There were moments, rare but precious, when we truly felt like a family. I remember Sunday afternoons when my parents would set aside work and we'd sit on Folly Beach eating boiled shrimp and listening to the waves. Logan, still little then, would run around building sandcastles while I sprawled out on a chair dreaming of a future bigger than Charleston. Those moments were like rare gems, sparkling but fragile. Even in those times, I could feel the distance between me and my parents, as if I was part of the family but never truly belonged. Logan, on the other hand, seemed born to belong. He had a charming smile, the kind that made people like him instantly. But what comes easily often leaves just as fast. As Logan grew older, I started to see that he had no concept of the value of what he had. Money, indulgence, our parents' love. To Logan, it was all just something to spend, to show off. By 16, he was already partying, racing our dad's car with friends, and I heard whispers from classmates. Logan was going too far. I tried talking to him, but he'd just laugh, pat my shoulder, and say, "Paxton, you worry too much. Relax, life's short." I'm not the type to give up easily, but with Logan, I soon realized I couldn't change him. The older he got, the more distant he became. He started staying away from home for days, sometimes weeks. Our parents, still blind to it, would say Logan was just finding his way. I don't know if they truly believed that or if they just didn't want to face the truth that their golden boy was sliding down a dangerous slope. Charleston, with all its beauty, sometimes felt like a gilded cage. I loved this city, the cobblestone streets, the historic churches, the ever-present scent of the sea in the air. But I also craved something bigger, something that was mine. I didn't want to just be the Johnson boy living in my family's shadow. I wanted to make a name for myself, a legacy of my own, And it was in that little diner's kitchen, amid the sizzle of grease and the smell of grilled seafood, that I found my dream. A restaurant where people didn't just come to eat, but to feel. Feel warmth, connection, and a piece of Charleston itself. I started envisioning Harbor and Hearth. The name came to me during a sleepless night, sitting on the porch, listening to the distant waves. It would be a place specializing in seafood and high-end steaks, where every dish told a story, where diners felt like they were coming home. I don't know how I'll make that dream a reality, but I know I won't stop trying. Not for the money, but because I want to prove I can do it, with my own hands and heart, not my family's name or legacy. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, need a starting point. And my starting point came one August afternoon right after my 18th birthday. I still remember that day, the way the sun poured golden light over the driveway, setting the azalea bushes ablaze with color. I had just finished a shift at the diner, the smell of grease still clinging to my clothes, when my dad called me into his study. He sat behind his massive oak desk with my mom standing beside him, holding a coffee mug, her expression unreadable. "Paxton," he said, his voice low but not cold. "We need to talk." I sat down, a flicker of unease in my chest. My parents rarely called me into formal conversations like this. They were usually too busy, so busy that I only caught glimpses of them through notes on the fridge or rushed calls from airports. But that day they looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. My dad slid a thick folder across the desk, its dark green cover stamped with the seal of a law firm I recognized immediately, the one that had managed my grandparents' estate since before I was born. "This is the trust," Dad said, tapping the folder lightly. "Your grandparents set it up for you and Logan. Now that you're 18, you'll have access. $2 million plus a house in the Battery. It's all yours." I blinked, trying to process the number. $2 million. A house. At 18, when all I owned was an old pickup truck and a few $100s saved from washing dishes, that figure felt like a lavish dream. But at the same time, it was like a bomb, ready to explode if I wasn't careful. I looked at my dad, then my mom, searching for some hint of what they expected me to do with this money. But my mom just smiled, the polite smile she reserved for clients, and said, "You're smart, Paxton. I trust you'll use it wisely." I left the study with the folder in hand, feeling like I was carrying a weight. That night I sat on my bed, flipping through the pages, reading the dry terms and cold numbers. But one thought kept circling in my mind. This is my chance. Not to spend, not to show off, but to build. I didn't want this money to define me, but I would use it to shape my future. I decided to use part of the trust to pay for college. I enrolled in a business administration program at the College of Charleston, but I didn't stop there. I also signed up for a culinary program at a small nearby school where I could learn to cook, manage a kitchen, and turn raw ingredients into an experience. I didn't want to be just a boss behind a desk. I wanted to understand every aspect of the restaurant I dreamed of. Those years were a blur of late nights, juggling business assignments and kitchen shifts where I learned to make a perfect beurre blanc sauce and cut beef without wasting a single scrap. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Logan, then only 10, started to notice I was on a different path. He'd look at me with a mix of curiosity and envy, asking things like, "Why do you study all day? Mom and Dad have money. You don't need to work." I tried to explain, but Logan just laughed, the carefree laugh of a kid who didn't yet understand the value of work. I only hoped that one day he would. After graduating, I didn't rest. The dream of Harbor and Hearth still burned in me, and I knew it was time to make it real. I met Jake, a friend from culinary class, a talented chef with wild hair and a fierce passion for seafood. We spent hours in a small coffee shop, sketching ideas on napkins, a restaurant with a warm, intimate vibe, oak walls, soft golden lighting, and a menu that celebrated what Charleston had to offer. Fresh lobster, seared scallops with butter, and steaks grilled over glowing coals. I used part of the trust to lease a space in downtown Charleston, a small corner lot overlooking the harbor, where the scent of the sea mingled with the smoke of the kitchen. Harbor and Hearth opened on a spring evening when I was 24. On opening night, I stood at the door watching customers walk in, my heart pounding like it might burst out of my chest. I wasn't nervous about failure. I was nervous that I wouldn't deliver on the promise I'd made to myself, to create a place where people felt at home. But as the first plates went out, as I heard laughter, the clink of glasses, and saw the satisfied looks in the diner's eyes, I knew I was on the right path. Around that time, I met Elise. She was an interior designer hired to revamp the restaurant's space. The first time we met, I was captivated by the way she talked about light and color, as if every detail in the restaurant told a story. Elise had softly curling brown hair, eyes as blue as Charleston's sea, and a smile that made me forget my exhaustion. We started dating, and by the time I was 26, I was down on one knee on Folly Beach at sunset, asking her to marry me. Elise said yes, and in that moment I felt my life was finally complete. The restaurant grew faster than I'd imagined. By 27, Harbor and Hearth had 4 locations from Charleston to Savannah. Elise and I worked tirelessly, but we were happy. We tried for a child, but failed attempts left Elise quietly crying some nights. I held her, telling her we'd be okay, that family wasn't just about blood, but about what we built together. Deep down, though, I knew we both longed for a child to love. Meanwhile, Logan was on a completely different path. When he turned 18, he received his trust, $2 million and a house, just like me. But instead of investing or studying, Logan turned the money into lavish parties, sports cars, and Vegas trips I only heard about through whispers from mutual friends. I tried to talk to him, to pull him back. "Logan," I said during one of his rare visits home, "you're burning through that money like it's paper. Stop before it's too late." But he just laughed. A laugh no longer carefree, but edged with arrogance. "Paxton, you're always so serious. I'm just living my life." My relationship with Logan grew more strained. Every time I tried to offer advice, he brushed it off, and our parents, as always, took his side. "Logan's still young," Mom said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let him find his way." I looked at her, at Dad, and felt a gap I couldn't bridge. Did they not see Logan spiraling, or did they not want to? I wasn't sure. But in my heart, I knew I couldn't abandon my brother. Not out of duty, but because I still remembered the little boy who built sandcastles on the beach, who used to look at me with admiration. Logan sank deeper into gambling and shady connections. One day I got a call from a friend saying Logan owed money to some unsavory people. I tried reaching out, but he didn't answer. I drove to his apartment only to find it empty, littered with empty liquor bottles. My heart sank, not just for Logan, but because I knew deep down I couldn't save him if he didn't want to be saved. I went home, held Elise, and told her everything. She took my hand and said, "Paxton, you've done all you can. It's time for Logan to take responsibility." I nodded, but inside I couldn't stop thinking about Logan, about the boy who was once my brother, and about the paths we'd both chosen. One that led me to the warm lights of Harbor and Hearth, and one that led Logan into the dark. The years that followed were a time of focusing on my own life. Harbor and Hearth grew beyond my expectations, with lines of diners waiting every weekend and glowing reviews in culinary magazines. Elise and I were still trying for a child, but each failure felt like a small stab, leaving us to hold each other in the dark, wondering if our dream of a complete family would ever come true. I'm not one to give up easily, but some days I felt like I was fighting something bigger than my own will. Then, one October evening, just after I turned 29, everything changed. I was at the main Charleston location of the restaurant, reviewing the menu for a special event when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated but picked up. Logan's voice came through hoarse, like he'd just downed a bottle of liquor. "Paxton," he said, no greeting, no preamble. "Are you at home? I need to see you right now." I wanted to say no. It had been over a year since we last spoke, and every encounter with Logan only reopened old wounds. But there was something in his voice, a desperation I'd never heard before, that stopped me from hanging up. "Fine," I said, "but come to the restaurant. I'm here." An hour later, Logan showed up, but he wasn't alone. He stood at the door, hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled, next to a girl I'd never met. She was young, probably just past 20, with tired eyes and an old canvas bag slung across her shoulder. But what stopped me in my tracks was what they brought with them. A baby girl about 3 months old nestled in the girl's arms, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The baby's big round eyes looked at me, and for a moment my heart seemed to stop. "This is Aubrey," Logan said, his voice trembling as if he were trying to hold it together. "She's my daughter. Me and Mia, we can't take care of her. Can you keep her for a while?" I stared at Logan, then at the girl, Mia, I assumed, and felt the floor drop out from under me. "Keep her?" I repeated, my voice sharper than intended. "Logan, this is a child, not something you can just drop off and pick up when you feel like it." I wanted to yell, to shake him until he snapped out of it. But Aubrey's innocent, curious eyes held me back. Mia spoke up, her voice quiet but cutting. "We don't want to be tied down, you know. We're young, we've got things we want to do. The kid, she just makes everything complicated." She said it without looking at Aubrey, as if the baby were a burden to be shed. I felt a surge of anger, but before I could respond, Logan cut in. "Paxton, you're the only one I trust. Just a few months, okay? I'll come back." I wanted to refuse, to push them both out of my life, but then I looked at Aubrey. She squirmed, her tiny hands reaching out as if grasping at the air. I thought of Elise, of the nights she cried over our dream of parenthood that remained out of reach. I thought of myself, of what I'd built, and of the chance I could give this child that Logan and Mia clearly weren't ready to offer. "All right," I said, my voice low, surprising even myself. "But you need to understand, Logan, this isn't a game." They left soon after, leaving Aubrey with a bag of clothes and diapers. I stood there in the restaurant, now empty of customers, holding a baby I never imagined would be part of my life. I called Elise, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained everything. "I'm bringing a baby home," I said, and through the phone I heard her take a deep breath. "Paxton," she whispered, "bring her here. We'll figure it out." When I walked into the house, Elise was waiting at the door, her eyes flickering between worry and excitement. She held out her arms, and I gently placed Aubrey in them. In that moment, as Elise held Aubrey and smiled with tears in her eyes, I knew we'd made the right choice. "We'll take care of her," Elise said, her voice firm. "Even if it's just for now, she deserves a home." The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. I, who thought I knew pressure from running 4 restaurants, learned what it was to stay up all night with a crying baby, to worry over every little cough, to race through the supermarket for the right formula. Elise, though, seemed born to be a mother. She sang lullabies to Aubrey, turned a corner of the living room into a play area, and every time Aubrey smiled, I saw a light in Elise's eyes, a light I hadn't seen in all the years we'd tried for a child. But it wasn't all easy. I called my parents, hoping they'd help me talk to Logan, make him see his responsibility. But their reaction stunned me. "Paxton," my mom said over the phone, her voice soft but biased, "you should see this as a blessing. God has given you and Elise a child. Logan's still young, he needs time to grow up." My dad only added, "Don't be too hard on your brother, he'll come back when he's ready." I hung up, feeling betrayed. My parents didn't blame Logan for abandoning his daughter, didn't worry about Aubrey, only cared about shielding their golden boy. I looked at Elise holding Aubrey in the armchair and felt a mix of anger and pain rise in me. "They don't care," I said, my voice choking. "They don't care about her, only about protecting Logan." Elise put her hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, but her eyes said it all. "We will be Aubrey's family, no matter what happens." In the weeks that followed, I tried to reach Logan, but he didn't answer. I heard from a mutual friend that he and Mia had moved to Miami, living in an endless cycle of parties as if Aubrey had never existed. I wanted to be angry, to scream in his face, but every time I looked at Aubrey, every time she grabbed my finger or giggled when Elise played peekaboo, I knew I couldn't let that anger overshadow what mattered. Aubrey wasn't a burden, she was a light, a reason for Elise and me to get up every morning. We started building a new life, with Aubrey at the center. I cut back on my time at the restaurant, delegating more to Jake so I could be home more. Elise designed a small bedroom for Aubrey with pale blue walls and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Every night I read to Aubrey, even though she was too young to understand. I told her stories of Charleston's ships of brave fishermen, and in my heart I promised to give her a better life than the one Logan had walked away from. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Logan and Mia had said temporary, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd return soon. I started thinking about the future, about whether we could become Aubrey's legal parents, about protecting her from the instability Logan brought. Elise agreed, but she also cautioned me. "Paxton, we have to be careful. Logan is her father. If he comes back..." She didn't finish, but I understood. One day Logan might return, and when that day came, I'd have to fight. Not just for Aubrey, but for the family Elise and I had begun to build. I looked at Aubrey, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and felt a new resolve. I had built harbor and hearth from nothing, faced challenges I never thought I could overcome. Now for Aubrey, I was ready to face anything. Even my brother, even my family, even my own past. This was no longer just my story or Logan's. This was the story of a little girl, and I would do everything to ensure she had a true home. The first few months with Aubrey were like a whirlwind. Elise and I, two people who had never been parents, suddenly had to learn how to change diapers, mix formula, and realize that a baby could cry loud enough to shake the walls. But amid the sleepless nights and hectic days, I found a joy I'd never known. Every time Aubrey grabbed my finger, every time she giggled at Elise's silly faces, my heart melted. She wasn't just a responsibility, she was family, the reason Elise and I woke up each morning with a new purpose. Elise, with her natural instincts, became the mother I could only have dreamed of. She spent hours playing with Aubrey, teaching her colors with little wooden blocks, singing lullabies her own mother once sang. I remember one evening when Aubrey was 6 months old, Elise holding her in the living room, the soft golden light from harbor and hearth spilling through the window. She sang, "Hush, little baby," her voice gentle as the lapping waves, and Aubrey, with her big round eyes, looked at her as if she were the entire world. I stood in the doorway watching them, and for the first time in my life I felt I truly belonged somewhere. Not in Charleston, not in the restaurant, but right here in this little house, with Elise and Aubrey. The years that followed were a string of beautiful moments, like precious gems sparkling in my memory. Aubrey's first birthday was celebrated at Harbor and Hearth. I closed the restaurant early, invited a few close friends and staff, and turned the space into a small party with balloons and a strawberry cake that Jake made by hand. Aubrey, in a pink dress, smeared frosting all over her face, laughing as Elise pretended to eat her nose. I took photos trying to capture every moment, but more than that, I wanted to hold on to the feeling of a complete family, where everything seemed right. Aubrey's first Christmas is another memory I'll carry forever. We set up a small tree in the living room, decorated with glittering ornaments and red ribbons that Elise carefully chose. Aubrey, now crawling, kept trying to grab the decorations, and I had to chase after her to keep the tree from toppling. On Christmas Eve, we wrapped her in a warm blanket, sat by the fireplace, and I read The Night Before Christmas while Elise made hot cocoa. When Aubrey fell asleep on my shoulder, I looked at Elise, and we didn't need words. Her eyes said it all. This is our family, no matter how unexpectedly it came to be. Aubrey's early milestones were our greatest joys. The first time she said "da," though I wasn't sure she knew what it meant. I hugged Elise, laughing like a kid. The first time she took wobbly steps from the couch to my arms, I felt like the whole world was cheering. We documented everything, photos, videos, scraps of paper where Elise jotted down Aubrey's silly antics. I hung a large photo of the three of us in the dining area of Harbor and Hearth, right by the bar, where I could see it every day at work. It was a reminder that no matter how busy the restaurant got, I always had a reason to come home. But deep down, I knew this happiness wasn't entirely carefree. Logan had vanished completely from Aubrey's life. I tried contacting him a few times after he left her with us, but his phone number was disconnected, and messages sent through mutual friends went unanswered. I heard from an acquaintance that Logan and Mia had split up, that he was living in Miami, immersed in lavish parties and brightly lit casinos. The $2 million trust he'd received at 18 was gone, squandered on fleeting pleasures and foolish investments. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. Not for the money, but for Logan. The boy who once built sandcastles with me on Folly Beach was now a stranger. Then worse news came. One day, when Aubrey had just turned 3, I got a call from an old family friend. "Paxton," he said, his voice heavy. "Logan sold the house in the Battery. The one your grandparents left him." I stood frozen, the phone nearly slipping from my hand. That house wasn't just property. It was part of our family's legacy, where my grandparents had lived, where I'd played as a child. Logan had sold it, probably to pay off debts or fuel his reckless lifestyle. I didn't know the details, but I knew one thing. Logan had hit rock bottom and he had no intention of stopping. I told Elise, hoping she'd help me find a way out of the helplessness choking me. She listened, as always, then took my hand. "Paxton," she said, "Logan made his choice. But you chose your path. And that path is us, you, me, and Aubrey. Don't let him drag you down." I nodded, but inside I couldn't stop thinking about Logan. I wondered if there was something I could have done differently, some way to pull him out of the darkness. But every time I looked at Aubrey, I knew I couldn't let Logan's past overshadow her future. We kept building our life around Aubrey. I cut back on restaurant hours, letting Jake and the management team handle more. Elise started working remotely more often, turning the living room into a makeshift office to stay close to Aubrey. We took her to parks, the zoo, and afternoons at the beach, where she loved chasing the shallow waves, squealing when the water touched her feet. I taught her how to make cookies, though most of the dough ended up in her hair rather than the oven. Elise taught her to draw, and I still keep Aubrey's first scribbled picture, a green streak she proudly called the sea. My parents, as usual, showed little interest in Aubrey. They called a few times, asking about her in passing, but never visited. I knew they were still in touch with Logan, still sending him money, despite my warnings that it only made things worse. Once, when I tried talking to my mom about Aubrey, she just said, "Paxton, you're doing well. But Logan's your brother. Don't turn your back on him." I wanted to scream that Logan was the one turning his back, on me, on Aubrey, on himself, but I didn't say anything. I'd learned that arguing with my parents about Logan only left me exhausted. 4 years passed, and Aubrey became the center of our world. She grew into a smart, curious girl with an energy that kept Elise and me laughing. I started thinking about legally adopting Aubrey, making her officially our daughter. Elise agreed, but we both knew it wouldn't be easy. Logan was still her biological father, and though he was gone, I knew he could return someday. I tried not to dwell on that possibility, but it lingered in my mind like a storm waiting on the horizon. Every night, when Aubrey was fast asleep, Elise and I would sit on the porch looking out at the sea. We talked about the future, opening another Harbor and Hearth location, taking Aubrey to Disney World when she was older. But above all, we talked about how we'd found each other and found Aubrey in a world full of uncertainty. "Did you ever think," Elise once asked me, "that we'd have a family like this?" I shook my head, took her hand, and said, "No, but I can't imagine life without you and her." But even in our happiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was fragile. Logan, though gone, remained a shadow in my mind. I knew he'd burned through his money, sold the house, and was living a life I no longer recognized. But I also knew that with Logan, things could change in an instant. And when that moment came, I'd have to be ready. Not just to protect Aubrey, but to protect the family Elise and I had poured our hearts into building. The storm I'd feared arrived on a June afternoon just after Aubrey turned 4. I was at Harbor and Hearth reviewing the summer menu when my phone rang. Another unknown number. I picked up, and Logan's voice came through, cold and sharp, devoid of the desperation I'd heard 4 years ago. "Paxton," he said. "I need to see you." "It's about Aubrey." My heart sank. I knew that tone, not the voice of a brother, but of someone calculating. "Logan," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "where have you been for 4 years? And now you suddenly want to talk about Aubrey?" He didn't answer right away, just let out a small, chilling laugh. "Meet me at the restaurant tonight, I'll explain." I called Elise immediately and told her everything. "I don't know what he wants," I said, "but I have a bad feeling." Elise was quiet for a moment, then said, "Paxton, whatever he wants, we have to protect Aubrey. She's our daughter, not Logan's." Her words were like a flame, reminding me that for 4 years we'd given Aubrey a home, a family, something Logan had never done. That evening, Logan walked into Harbor and Hearth in a cheap suit, his hair slicked back but his eyes weary as if he hadn't slept in days. He sat down, ordered a whiskey, and got straight to the point. "I know about the trust," he said, looking me in the eye. "Our grandparents set up a fund for the first child of each son. Aubrey has a trust, Paxton, $1.5 million, and it kicks in when she's 10. I'm her father. I have rights to that money." I was stunned not by the money, but by the way Logan spoke of Aubrey, as if she were a tool, a ticket out of his debts. I knew about the trust, but I'd never thought of it the way Logan did. It was meant to secure Aubrey's future, not to be exploited. "Logan," I said, my voice trembling with anger, "you abandoned her 4 years ago. You don't get to call yourself her father." He shrugged as if my words carried no weight. "I'm her biological father, Paxton. The law will side with me. I want Aubrey back." I looked into his eyes, searching for some trace of affection, some hint of the boy who was once my brother, but I saw only coldness. Logan didn't want Aubrey. He wanted the money. I went home and told Elise everything. She sat silently, gripping her teacup, her eyes flickering between anger and fear. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I wanted to say I'd give Aubrey back, that I didn't want to fight my brother, but then I looked into the living room where Aubrey was playing with her wooden blocks, softly singing a song Elise had taught her. I thought about handing her over to Logan, to someone who'd never been part of her life, who saw her only as a commodity. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't let her go." The next morning, I took Aubrey to the park as usual. She ran around chasing butterflies, laughing when I pretended to fall on the grass. But when I mentioned Logan, just a simple question asking if she remembered Uncle Logan, Aubrey shook her head, her eyes suddenly wide with fear. "Don't like him," she said, her voice small but certain. "He's scary." I hugged her, feeling like my heart was being squeezed. She didn't remember Logan, but somehow she sensed the unease he brought. When I told Elise, she took my hand, her eyes resolute. "Paxton, she needs us, not Logan. You can't let him take her just for the money. We have to keep Aubrey, no matter what it takes." Her words burned away any hesitation in me. I knew she was right. Aubrey wasn't just a part of us, she was our daughter, no matter what the law said. But Logan didn't stop. A week later, I received a court notice. Logan had filed a lawsuit demanding custody of Aubrey. Reading the dry words on the paper, I felt the floor collapse beneath me. Logan, who hadn't visited Aubrey, hadn't called to check on her, was now claiming her as if it were his right. I sat in my office, staring at the photo of me, Elise, and Aubrey on my desk, feeling a surge of anger and pain. This wasn't just a fight for Aubrey. It was a fight for the family I'd sworn to protect. I called my parents, hoping they'd side with me, that they'd see the absurdity of Logan's actions. But that call only made things worse. "Paxton," my mom said, her voice soft but biased, "Logan's her father. You can't keep her forever. He's made mistakes, but he's trying to make things right." My dad was harsher. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Give her back to Logan and everything will be fine." I hung up, feeling betrayed. My parents, who should have understood that I'd given Aubrey a home, chose to stand by Logan, not because they believed he was a good father, but because they couldn't let go of their favorite son. I looked at Elise, told her everything, and saw her eyes well up. "They don't care about Aubrey," she said, her voice breaking. They only care about Logan. I nodded, feeling an unbridgeable gap between me and my parents. For the first time, I realized that blood family wasn't always true family. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights. Elise and I spent hours discussing what to do. We knew Logan wasn't suing for love. He was suing for the $1.5 million waiting in the trust. I thought about the trust, about our grandparents' intention when they set it up, to secure their grandchildren's future, not to be prey for greed. I thought about Aubrey, her smile, the way she called me Daddy and Elise Mommy, and I knew I couldn't lose her. We'll fight, I told Elise, my voice steadier than ever. Whether it's Logan, our parents, or the whole world, we'll keep Aubrey. Elise nodded, squeezing my hand, and in that moment I felt a new strength. This wasn't just my story or Logan's anymore. It was Aubrey's story about her right to grow up in a safe, loving home with people willing to sacrifice everything for her. I began preparing for the legal battle. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Logan was her biological father, and the law often favored blood. But I also knew I had something Logan didn't. 4 years of love, care, and moments that Aubrey called home. I thought about the morning she ran into our room, hugging Elise tightly, about the scribbled drawings she proudly showed me. I thought about the fear in her eyes when Logan's name came up, and I knew I couldn't let her fall into the hands of someone who saw her only as a paycheck. But knowing something is one thing, proving it in court is another. Logan could show up in a crisp suit with his charming smile and lies about wanting to start over. I needed more than emotions, more than memories. I needed hard, undeniable facts to protect Aubrey. So I decided not to rely solely on a lawyer, but also to enlist someone who could dig into Logan's past and uncover the secrets he was trying to hide. I contacted Rachel Whitman, a lawyer recommended by a friend from Harbor and Hearth. Rachel wasn't the flashy type who appeared in newspapers or loud advertisements. She was petite, with short platinum blonde hair and eyes sharp as a blade. At our first meeting in her small downtown Charleston office, Rachel listened to my story, taking meticulous notes, and promised only one thing. "Paxton, I'll fight for you and Aubrey, but we need evidence. Evidence that Logan is unfit to be a father and that you and Elise are her true family." Rachel suggested hiring a private investigator to look into Logan. "We need to know what he's doing, how he's living, and why he's suddenly back for Aubrey," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "I know someone good, Nathan Cole. He's not cheap, but he'll find what we need." I nodded without hesitation. Money wasn't the issue, Aubrey was. I'd built Harbor and Hearth from nothing. Now I'd use every resource I had to protect my family. Nathan Cole was a middle-aged man, tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to see through everything. When we met at a coffee shop near the harbor, he didn't beat around the bush. "Give me 4 weeks, Nathan said, his voice low and steady. "I'll find out everything about Logan, from his daily habits to the secrets he doesn't want anyone to know. But brace yourself, Paxton. What I uncover might not be pleasant." I nodded, though a chill ran down my spine. I knew Logan had spiraled, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face just how bad things had gotten. "Do it, Nathan," I said. "Find everything you can. For Aubrey." While Nathan got to work, Elise and I tried to keep Aubrey's life as normal as possible. We took her to preschool, had family game nights, and read her bedtime stories. But every time I looked at Aubrey, I couldn't help thinking about the upcoming trial. I saw the worry in Elise's eyes, though she tried to hide it. "We'll get through this, right?" she asked one night after Aubrey was asleep. I took her hand, trying to seem strong. "We'll get through it," I said, though inside I wasn't sure. Nathan reported back after 2 weeks, and what he found made me both angry and heartbroken. Logan hadn't just burned through his trust fund and sold the Battery House. He was living in a rundown apartment in Miami, drowning in debt to people Nathan described as not the kind you want to meet in a dark alley. Credit card bills, gambling receipts, even police reports, Nathan had it all. Logan had been arrested twice for disorderly conduct, once for a bar fight. Neighbors in Miami reported hearing shouts and breaking objects from his apartment, and an ex-girlfriend revealed that Logan had been violent when drunk or high. "High?" I asked, my voice catching. Nathan nodded, sliding a folder of photos across the table, images of Logan in places I didn't want to imagine. Dark corners of Miami with people whose eyes held no warmth. "He's using Paxton," Nathan said. "Not so bad he's completely out of control, but enough to make him unstable. And that's not the worst of it." The worst, according to Nathan, was a private meeting my parents had held with the family lawyer, Harold Grayson, a few months before Logan filed his lawsuit. Nathan had obtained a recording from a former employee of the law firm who'd quit and was willing to share information for a price. In the meeting, my parents and Logan discussed Aubrey's trust, the $1.5 million that would become available when she turned 10. They were looking for ways to meet the conditions to access the money early, arguing that Logan, as her biological father, needed it to stabilize his life. I listened to the recording, my mother's voice coming through soft but calculated. "If Logan gets Aubrey back, the trust will be his. We just need to make sure he looks stable in court." I sat in Nathan's small office, feeling like the blood in my veins had turned to ice. My parents, the people I'd thought at least cared about their granddaughter, had known Logan's plan from the start. They didn't just support him, they helped him scheme to take Aubrey's money. "They know Logan doesn't want Aubrey," Nathan said, his voice low. "They know he only wants the money, but they're still backing him." I went home and told Elise everything. She sat silently, clutching her coffee mug, her eyes red. "They're not family, Paxton," she said, her voice trembling. "Not if they're willing to sell Aubrey's future to save Logan." I nodded, but inside I felt a deep wound. My parents had betrayed not just me, but Aubrey, the granddaughter they'd never visited, never held, never called their own. Nathan didn't stop there. He kept gathering evidence, financial records showing Logan had blown hundreds of thousands on gambling and parties, photos of him in casinos and bars with people Nathan called associates. He interviewed our neighbors, who confirmed Logan hadn't visited Aubrey in 4 years. A former friend of Logan's, now sober after rehab, agreed to testify, recounting how Logan had bragged about taking the kid back for the money. Even a social worker who dealt with Logan in Miami provided a report on his erratic behavior, from neglecting responsibilities to substance use. Each piece of evidence was a knife, but also a bullet for our legal fight. Rachel reviewed every document, every photo, every statement, building an airtight case. "We have enough to prove Logan's unfit," she said at a meeting in her office. "But we need to be ready for him to play dirty. Logan and your parents will try to paint a picture of him turning his life around. We have to be prepared to counter that." I nodded, but my mind kept circling back to my parents. I called them one last time, hoping for some miracle to change their minds. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice calm but heavy. "I know about the meeting with Grayson. I know you're helping Logan take Aubrey's money. Why? Why not Aubrey? Why Logan?" My mom was silent, then sighed. "Paxton, you don't understand. Logan needs us. He's our son." I hung up, unwilling to hear more. That was the last time I spoke to them before the trial. Every night I sat by Aubrey's crib watching her sleep, telling myself I was doing the right thing. But I was scared the law wouldn't see what I saw, that Logan would find a way to manipulate the system, that my parents would use their money and influence to help him. Elise took my hand, reminding me we weren't alone. "We have Rachel, we have Nathan, and most importantly, we have the truth," she said. "And we have Aubrey." I looked out at the sea from our porch, where I'd once dreamed of harbor and hearth, where I'd thought I could build anything with my own hands. Now I faced a battle bigger than any dream. A battle not just for Aubrey, but for what family, love, and the life we'd built over 4 years meant. I knew the trial wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I wouldn't give up. For Aubrey, for Elise, and for my belief that the truth, no matter how hard, would always find its way to the light. The day of the trial arrived like a summer storm, sudden, fierce, and unavoidable. I woke up early, the sky still cloaked in mist, standing by Aubrey's crib and watching her sleep. Her rosy cheeks, her soft curls falling across her forehead. She looked peaceful, as if the world wasn't about to judge her future. Elise came in, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Today's the day," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "We've got this, Paxton." I nodded, but inside I felt a crushing weight. This wasn't just a trial. It was a fight to keep Aubrey, to keep the family we'd built. The courtroom in downtown Charleston was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden walls and rigid benches. I sat beside Rachel Whitman, trying to stay calm as Logan walked in with his lawyer, Harold Grayson, who'd worked for my family since I was a child. Logan wore a sharp navy suit, his hair neatly combed, and a smile that made me want to stand up and shout. He didn't look like someone who'd squandered his fortune, who'd abandoned his daughter for 4 years. He looked like a model father, and I knew that was the image he wanted the judge to see. My parents sat right behind Logan, their eyes avoiding mine. Mom wore an elegant gray dress. Dad sat ramrod straight, as if this were just another business meeting. A pang of pain hit my chest, not from anger, but from disappointment. They were my parents, but they'd chosen Logan's side, knowing full well he didn't deserve it. The trial began with Grayson's opening statement. He spoke of Logan like a hero rising from his mistakes. "My client, Logan Johnson, has faced challenges in his past," Grayson said, his voice deep and persuasive. "But he has changed. He's completed rehab, secured stable employment, and now he wants to make amends by being a father to Aubrey. As her biological father, he has the right and the desire to provide her with a good life." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting to contain my anger. Logan sat there, his practiced look of remorse nodding along with Grayson's words. Grayson presented evidence, a certificate from a Miami rehab center, a job contract with a small company, and photos of Logan in neat suits, as if he'd truly turned his life around. My parents were called as witnesses, and their words felt like another stab in my chest. "Logan is a devoted father," my mom said, her voice trembling as if she were trying to convince herself. "He just needed time to grow up. We believe he can give Aubrey a loving family." Dad was briefer. "Logan's my son. I know he'll do the right thing." I looked at them, the people who'd once been my rock, and felt an unbridgeable gap. They didn't talk about Aubrey, about what was best for her. They only talked about Logan as if she were just a piece in his redemption plan. When it was Rachel's turn, she stood, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but powerful. "What we've just heard is a fabricated story meant to obscure the truth. Logan Johnson is not a devoted father nor a man who has changed. He abandoned his daughter, Aubrey Johnson, 4 years ago and only returned when he learned of a trust fund worth $1.5 million set aside for her." Rachel presented the evidence piece by piece, like bricks building a wall of truth. First came Nathan Cole's report detailing Logan's life in Miami. Mounting debts, gambling receipts, and arrests for disorderly conduct. She displayed Nathan's photos, Logan in casinos, at parties with a bottle in hand, alongside people whose eyes held no kindness. A video from a bar showed Logan shouting at a woman, his hand raised as if about to strike. I heard murmurs from the gallery behind me, and a flicker of hope sparked. Rachel called the first witness, Marcus, a former friend of Logan's, now sober after rehab. He took the stand, his eyes tinged with regret. "Logan told me he'd take his daughter back to get the trust fund money," Marcus said, his voice low. "He didn't care about the girl. He only talked about how the money would clear his debts and start him over." I glanced at Logan, saw him lower his head, not out of shame, but because he'd been exposed. Next was our neighbor, Mrs. Clara, an elderly woman who lived across the street. She confirmed Logan hadn't visited Aubrey in 4 years. "I see Paxton and Elise with Aubrey every day," she said, her voice warm but firm. "They take her to school, play with her in the park, throw her birthday parties. I've never seen Logan, not once." Aubrey's preschool teacher, Miss Emily, testified next. She described Aubrey as a happy, bright child who grew quiet, even scared when Uncle Logan was mentioned. I asked Aubrey about her biological father once, Miss Emily said. She said she didn't want to meet him, that he scared her. My heart clenched, a mix of pain and pride. Aubrey, at just 4, knew who her real family was. Elise was our final witness. She took the stand in a pale blue dress Aubrey had once called the color of the sea. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she spoke. "Aubrey is our daughter," Elise said, looking directly at the judge. "We've raised her since she was 3 months old, loved and cared for her as our own. Logan knows nothing about her. He doesn't know she loves strawberry cookies, that she's afraid of the dark, that she draws pictures of the sea and calls them home. We are Aubrey's family and we'll do anything to protect her." I looked at Elise, a surge of pride and love welling up. She wasn't just speaking for me, she was speaking for Aubrey, for the years we'd spent building a home. When Elise returned to her seat, I took her hand, squeezing gently, and she smiled, her eyes red. The turning point came when Rachel called Grayson, the family lawyer, to the stand. Under her razor-sharp questioning, Grayson admitted Logan had contacted him multiple times about Aubrey's trust. He wanted to know how to access the money as soon as possible, Grayson said, his voice hesitant. I advised him he'd need custody to manage the trust. The courtroom fell silent save for the scratch of the clerk's pen. I looked at Logan, saw him staring at the floor, and knew he was done. The judge, an older woman with a stern gaze, finally spoke. "Mr. Logan Johnson," she said, her voice echoing in the room. "You abandoned your daughter, Aubrey Johnson, for 4 years without a single visit or act of responsibility. The evidence shows you returned with the intent to exploit her trust fund, an action not only unethical but detrimental to the child's best interests. You are unfit to parent Aubrey." She turned to Elise and me, her expression softening. "Mr. Paxton Johnson and Mrs. Elise Johnson have provided Aubrey with a safe, loving, and stable environment. They have acted in her best interests, and I believe Aubrey belongs with them." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Elise threw her arms around me, tears streaming down her face. Rachel patted my shoulder, a small smile on her lips. Logan sat motionless while my parents stood and left the courtroom without looking back. I didn't know if they were angry or ashamed, but in that moment I didn't care. All that mattered was Aubrey, the little girl waiting for us at home, unaware that her future had just been secured. As we left the courthouse, I held Elise's hand, feeling like we'd just walked out of a storm. I thought of Aubrey, her smile, the years ahead. We'd won, but I knew this wasn't the end. Logan might return. My parents might try to exert pressure, but I also knew Elise and I would never give up. We'd fought for Aubrey, and we'd keep fighting. For her, for our family, and for the light we'd found in the darkness. The judge's ruling was clear. Elise and I were granted legal custody of Aubrey. More than that, she paved the way for us to proceed with formal adoption, a step we'd dreamed of for so long. As Rachel Whitman explained the ruling's implications, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Aubrey, the little girl we'd loved since she was a tiny infant, would now officially be our daughter. I looked at Elise, saw the tears glistening in her eyes, and knew she was thinking the same thing. This was the start of a new chapter, one where Aubrey would grow up surrounded by love and safety. But this victory didn't come without a cost. My parents, after the trial, didn't say a word to me. They left the courtroom with cold expressions, Mom with her head bowed, Dad walking stiffly as if he'd just lost a major bet. I called them a few days later, hoping to explain, to mend things, but Mom only said one thing before hanging up. "You chose to go against family, Paxton. Don't expect us to forgive you." Her words cut like a knife, but I didn't regret my choice. If protecting Aubrey meant severing ties with my parents, it was a price I was willing to pay. Family, I realized, isn't about blood. It's about those who stand by you, love you, and sacrifice for you. For me, that was Elise and Aubrey. Logan, as I'd predicted, didn't stick around long. After losing the case, he vanished from Charleston without a goodbye. I heard from an old friend that he'd returned to Miami, slipping back into his old life, parties, gambling, and shady connections. Part of me wanted to find him, to pull him out of the mire, but I knew I couldn't. Logan had chosen his path, and though he was once my brother, I couldn't let him drag Aubrey down with him. I only hoped that one day he'd find the light, as I had with Aubrey and Elise. Meanwhile, Elise and I began rebuilding our lives with Aubrey at the center. We completed the adoption process, and on a crisp fall morning, as golden leaves fell on Charleston's cobblestone streets, we received the official papers. Aubrey was now Aubrey Johnson, the legal daughter of Paxton and Elise Johnson. I hugged Elise, hugged Aubrey, and felt my heart overflow. "We did it," Elise whispered, and I could only nod, speechless. To mark this milestone, Elise and I decided to open a new Harbor and Hearth location. We chose a spot on the outskirts of Charleston, an old house overlooking the sea with large windows and a small garden full of azaleas. We named the restaurant Aubrey's, not just to honor our daughter, but as a symbol of hope, of family, of what we'd fought to keep. On opening night, I stood at the door watching guests stream in, hearing laughter and the clink of glasses, and felt like I was living in a dream. Aubrey, in her favorite blue dress, ran around, showing everyone the picture she'd drawn of my restaurant. Elise stood beside me, her hand in mine, and smiled. "This is our home, Paxton," she said. "Not just the restaurant, but everything we've built." Looking back on my journey, I see an 18-year-old boy standing on a porch, clutching a dream of Harbor and Hearth and a future he could shape. I see the days spent working in a sweltering kitchen, the nights studying late, the failures and recoveries. I see Elise, who walked into my life and brought light. I see Aubrey, the unexpected girl who became the center of our world. And I see myself, a father willing to give up everything, blood, family, comfort, even the past, to protect my daughter. I've learned many lessons on this journey. The first is about the value of work. Money can come easily, like the trust funds Logan and I received, but only labor, only sweat and heart brings true meaning. Logan squandered his trust on fleeting pleasures, and now he has nothing but debt and regret. I, on the other hand, used mine to build, not just restaurants, but a life, a family. The second lesson is about family. Blood isn't always everything. My parents chose Logan not because they loved him more, but because they couldn't face the truth of his failures. But true family, I've learned, is those who stand by you, share your joys and pains. For me, that's Elise, Aubrey, and the people who've witnessed our journey, neighbors, friends, teachers, who confirmed that Aubrey belongs with us. The final and perhaps most important lesson is about protecting what's precious. I fought for Aubrey not just because I love her, but because I believe every child deserves a safe home, a place to grow with love and respect. I've learned that sometimes to protect a child's future, you have to be willing to let go of things you once thought were essential. My advice to anyone facing tough choices is to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is. Don't let indulgence or habit cloud your responsibility. Logan is proof of the consequences of living without purpose, without accountability. Put your children's future above personal gain, because they are the ones who will carry your legacy, whether it's one of love or of selfishness. I stand on Folly Beach, where I once dreamed of the future, where I proposed to Elise, where Aubrey chased waves. I look out at the sea, hear the crash of the tides, and think of my journey. From an 18-year-old with a trust fund and a dream, I've become a father, a husband, a man who knows that family isn't something you're given. It's something you build. And I will keep building for Aubrey, for Elise, and for the light we've found in the darkness.